Coming up on Arirang News, the heirs to the fortune of Samsung Group announce how they're going to pay the taxes on the billions of dollars they're about to inherit from the estate of Samsung's late chairman, Lee Gun-hee. More than $10 billion coming due in the next several years. South Korea says it's going to let people who are fully vaccinated enter the country without having to self-quarantine for 2 weeks if they got their vaccine here in Korea. And the Asian Development Bank is the latest to raise its growth forecast for the South Korean economy this year to 3.5% as the economy recovers to pre-pandemic levels. It's 5 p.m. here in Seoul. Thanks for joining us on Arirang News. I'm Devin Whiting. This morning, the heirs of Samsung Group announced how they're going to pay the billions of dollars they're going to owe on the fortune they're inheriting from Samsung's late chairman, Lee Gun-hee, who died last year. He was the richest person in Korea. With the details, we have in the studio today our very own Min Soo-hyun, who's been covering the economy and has spent some time digging deeper into this story. So, Soo-hyun, it's great to have you here today.
Good afternoon.
Well, give us the big picture on the inheritance coming from Korea's richest man.
Well, sure. The late Samsung chairman Lee Gun-hee is known to have had at least $20 billion of assets. This includes his stocks valued at around $70 billion, but he also has around $2 billion in real estate, his art collection, and cash. In a statement, the Lee family said that they will have to pay around $11 billion in inherited taxes, by far the highest amount ever imposed in South Korea.
Well, of course, a big inheritance like this is often a trope we see in dramas, and, people are very interested in this kind of question. So did we hear about how they're going to split up this fortune?
Well, Devin, unfortunately, no. Samsung Group did not provide details on how the family will split the fortune. By law, his wife, Hong Na-hee, will inherit the largest share, 1/3, and the 3 children will receive 2/9. But considering the leadership succession at the Samsung Group, industry sources expect most of the $17 billion in shares to be inherited by Samsung Electronics Vice Chairman Lee Jae-yong. The late chairman had stakes in 4 listed Samsung affiliates, including Samsung Electronics and Samsung Life Insurance. If handed over to his only son, it will help Lee Jae-yong get a stronger hold over Samsung Group. In this case, the 2 daughters, Lee Boo-jin and Lee So-hyun, will split the remaining shares, as well as part of their father's real estate, which includes half of the land under Korea's biggest theme park, Everland, and of course his pricey house in Seoul.
Well, Soo-hyun, as you know, Korea has one of the highest rates of inheritance tax in the world. And as you said just a minute ago, they're going to owe about $11 billion. That's nothing to sneeze at, of course. So this would be by far the most that anyone has ever owed in Korea, in fact. So how are they going to pay it?
Well, the family has decided to pay their inheritance taxes in installments. So just like how LG Group chairman Koo Gang-mo chose to pay his inheritance taxes in 2018. So under the current tax law, they will pay 1/6 of the tax by this Friday and pay the rest over the next 5 years at an interest rate of 1.2% per year. Take a listen.
Where the inheritance tax exceeds 20 million won, upon application by the taxpayer, the tax office may grant permission for annual installments. In general, the installments shall be made within 5 years.
So even in installments, this is expected to cost the family about $2 billion every year. Some industry watchers say that the massive tax bill could push the family to sell shares in Samsung units, but this is unlikely because that would weaken the family's ownership. And so a way for the family to pay the bill without having to sell is to use the dividends from their Samsung holdings. They could make their payments with those and use their shares as collateral for loans to pay off the rest.
Well, tax filing is, of course, a fascinating subject to some people, but one way to reduce your tax bill is to donate to charity, and it sounds like that's something the Samsung family are planning to do.
That's right. So the family has decided to donate $900 million to the medical field. About $600 million will be used to fight infectious diseases and the other $300 million to treat children with cancer and rare diseases. Also from Lee Gun-hee's art collection, 23,000 pieces will be donated to state-run museums like the National Museum of Korea and the National Museum of Modern and Contemporary Art. The late chairman was an art enthusiast and is believed to have owned over $2 billion of artwork. His vast collection includes national treasures like landscape paintings by the legendary Korean painter Cheong, as well as paintings from the renowned Korean artist Lee Jung-sop and Park Soo-gun. His more contemporary collection also includes Western artwork from Swiss sculptor Alberto Giacometti and the American painter Mark Rothko.
Well, the art collection has prompted an interesting discussion, a bigger discussion about what happens to works of art in situations like these, because, there's a risk they could end up leaving the country, and the art community wants the government to change the rules on taxes to ensure that these paintings stay here in Korea so people can enjoy them. Tell us about that.
Well, under the current law, aside from cash, only real estate and securities can be used to pay tax. And so to reduce their overall tax liability, the Samsung family may have decided to donate a significant chunk of the art collection. The art community is calling on the government to allow artwork as a means to pay inheritance taxes. What they fear is that the masterpieces might be sold overseas, and so by using them to pay tax, they would stay here, and so people can enjoy them. And now they're pushing to reform the tax law to make this happen.
In principle, the current law prohibits overseas transfer of domestic works of art over 50 years old. So it's unlikely that our artwork will be sold overseas. But art by famous foreign artists may leave the country.
Some scholars and civic organizations, however, have doubted the idea, saying that art could be used as a means to evade taxes, and have also questioned the objectivity of the appraisal used to give them monetary value.
The problem we have here is whether artwork can be fairly appraised in the country. I believe we should have a third party, like an overseas institute, to help appraise artwork.
So in other countries like France, the UK and Germany, inheritance taxes can be paid with heritage assets and cultural artworks. The Picasso Museum in Paris is a classic example of when the French government allowed the family to pay by donating thousands of works of art.
Well, Sukhan, a very interesting report today. Thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Thank you.
The Korean stock market is shaping up to have a record-breaking year when it comes to new listings. There's another big IPO coming up, this time for the company SK Technology, which makes materials for batteries, and competition for shares is fierce. As of 11 this morning, it had attracted deposits worth around $5.5 billion from investors hoping to get shares when it is listed. That's an all-time record, surpassing the IPO of the vaccine maker SK Bioscience just last month, which drew in $3.9 billion. The share price for SK Technology is expected to be between 78 and 105,000 won, which is about $75 to $95. The IPO is scheduled for May 11th. In other news, the number of births in South Korea in February was the lowest for that particular month since related records began 40 years ago. Data from Statistics Korea show total births at just over 21,400, a decline of almost 6% on year. The number has been dropping on year for 63 straight months. The number of births in February was exceeded by the number of deaths by more than 2,000. The number of new marriages, was also the lowest ever for the month of February, largely due to the pandemic. In the first quarter of this year, South Korea's economy returned to growth levels seen before the pandemic. Now the latest to raise its forecast for this year is the Asian Development Bank. which is calling for growth in 2021 of 3.5%. Kim Sung-min reports.
The Asian Development Bank has revised up its outlook for South Korea's economy this year, citing growing chip exports and the government's fiscal support. The bank forecasts South Korea's economy to grow 3.5% in 2021, up from its early prediction of 3.3% in December. Such an outlook exceeds some other major predictions, 3.2% growth by the Korean government and 3.3% from the OECD. The revision comes a day after South Korea posted outstanding GDP growth of 1.6% for the first 3 months of the year, recovering back to its pre-pandemic level. The Korean government's efforts to stir up consumption, such as giving tax reductions for automobile purchases and giving monetary support to the public, contributed to the positive outlook. The ADB's grouping of 45 Asia-Pacific countries, dubbed Developing Asia, is expected to see a bumper growth of 7.3% in 2021 and up to 5.3% growth in 2022. Of those, China was forecast to grow 8.1% and Vietnam is looking at 6.7% growth. The bank gave an economic outlook of 11% growth for India, despite the country's recent struggle with the resurgence of the COVID-19 pandemic.
India, it is the second largest economy in the region, and therefore it does have important implications for the region as a whole, in particular for its neighbors in South Asia. The forecast is still achievable and realistic, but we do flag the downside risks from the current rise in the current severe outbreak.
Another strong boost comes from the U.S., as many Asian economies heavily depend on its economy.
Rapid economic recovery in the U.S. means stronger import demand. The U.S. is, for many Asian economies, is one of the top 2, top 3 trading partners, and therefore that will likely provide a boost to growth.
Given that ADB's forecast assumes that vaccine drives will go as planned, slow progress in vaccination and shortages in supply could undermine growth. Increasing geopolitical tensions, production bottlenecks, and tough financial conditions could become other risks, which could also pull back the growth of the global economy this year. Kim Sung-min, Arirang News.
And South Korea's consumer sentiment is up this month for the 4th month in a row, and it's the highest it's been since January last year before the pandemic. The Bank of Korea's Composite Consumer Sentiment Index is up 1.7 points on month in April at 102.2. A reading above 100 means optimists outnumber pessimists. The central bank said this is good news for the economic recovery and said it's thanks to strong exports, improving jobs numbers, and the vaccine campaign. South Korea reported a sharp rise on Wednesday in the number of new coronavirus cases, and proportion of those that cannot be traced is the highest yet, which means the number is going to rise. On Wednesday, there were 775 new cases. Over the past 2 weeks, the proportion that are untraceable has risen to 29.9%. There was one additional death, raising the death toll to 1,821. As for social distancing, the current measures are due to expire this coming Sunday, so a revised set of rules will be announced in the coming days and take effect next Monday. Also next Monday, rapid self-test kits made by the company Humasys will be hitting the market. They'll be available for purchase online and in pharmacies at the price of $7 to $8 or thereabouts each. South Korea says it's not going to require people who've been fully vaccinated to stay in self-quarantine for 2 weeks when they enter the country, but that's for people who got their vaccines in Korea. The government's also working to speed up the release of South Korea's own locally made vaccines within this year. Lee Kyung-eun has more.
In South Korea, a 2-week self-quarantine period is mandatory for anyone who's come in close contact with confirmed patients or who has recently flown into the country from overseas. But those who've been fully vaccinated in the country will be exempt from this rule starting May 5th.
Those who are fully vaccinated will be exempt from self-quarantine should they come into contact with confirmed patients but test negative. Also, those vaccinated won't have to self-quarantine after visiting other countries if they test negative and have no symptoms.
However, they will still have to report their health conditions to authorities every day and get tested twice during the 2-week period. And the measure applies only from 2 weeks after vaccination, as this is when people have fully established antibodies. And 2 weeks of quarantine are still required for those who visited countries with high risk from variants like South Africa, Brazil, and India, and those who have vaccines not approved by South Korean authorities like Russia's Sputnik V. In another vaccination effort, South Korea is aiming to speed up the development of its own local vaccines. The government is currently conducting clinical trials of 5 local vaccine candidates, 2 of which are set to head into phase 3 in the next half of the year.
The government has injected $62 million to be comprehensively used for preclinical trials, clinical trials, and the production process to make sure vaccines can be released as early as the year end or early next year at the latest.
If it goes as planned, South Korea will be able to produce its own vaccines as well as making vaccines developed by foreign drug makers on consignment. 이경은, Arirang News.
The South Korean military has started vaccinating service members about a week earlier than scheduled due to recent cluster infections at military bases. All service members over the age of 30 are eligible to receive the AstraZeneca shot starting Wednesday, with those stationed in remote areas and on the front lines considered to be top priority. Kim Ji-yeon reports.
Men in uniform disembark from their vessels to stand in line, get their body temperature checked, and have consultations on their medical history. For 2 weeks starting Wednesday, service members aged 30 and older in the South Korean military are eligible to receive AstraZeneca's COVID-19 vaccine. The inoculation campaign is being carried out about a week earlier than scheduled due to recent cluster infections on a Navy vessel stationed in Chine and an Air Force base in Sachon. Inoculations among military personnel are carried out on a voluntary basis.
I feel relieved that I'm getting the vaccine shot. Starting Wednesday, military service members aged 30 or older are eligible to receive COVID-19 vaccinations. I hope a lot of people get vaccinated in order for the military to do its job in protecting the country by returning to its vibrant state. The ROK Army will do its best for the safe transfer and management of the vaccines, monitor post-inoculation side effects, and ultimately reach its goal to complete first-dose vaccinations by early May.
The Defense Ministry said it's to complete inoculating 126,000 military personnel and civilian workers in the military with the first doses at military hospitals and barracks by early May. Since most of the officers in the executive positions are above the age of 30, the ministry expects the vaccinations could prevent the spread of the virus among commuting officers. Inoculations are being prioritized for those stationed on the front line and in remote areas, each unit's control and communication centers, guard posts in the demilitarized zone, as well as those stationed in aircraft and vessels. Consultations are underway to devise an inoculation plan for service members under the age of 30, estimated as of 455,000. That includes the type of COVID-19 vaccine they'll be receiving, since local authorities have halted the use of AstraZeneca shots for that age group due to post-inoculation safety concerns involving blood clots. So far, the South Korean military has reported a total of 777 coronavirus cases, of which 84 are still receiving treatment. On the 61st day of South Korea's vaccination campaign on Wednesday, local health authorities reported that nearly 2.6 million people, almost 5% of the country's entire population, have received their first dose of the COVID-19 vaccine. Around 150,000 people have received their second dose. Kim Ji-yeon, Arirang News.
Countries around the world are lending a helping hand to India as it battles a devastating surge of COVID-19. The U.S. is looking for a way to send vaccines. The EU and South Korea say they'll send supplies like oxygen and test kits. Kim Hyo-sun reports.
The Biden administration has pledged to send ready-to-use COVID-19 vaccines to India. On top of medical parts, India needs to domestically produce its own vaccines.
I've discussed with him when we'll be able to send actual vaccines to India, which will be my intention to do. The problem is right now we have to make sure we have other vaccines like Novavax and others coming on probably. And I think we'll be in a position to be able to share vaccines as well as know-how with other countries who are in real need. That's the hope and expectation.
President Biden also said India was there for the U.S. during the early days of the pandemic. The leaders of the two countries spoke over the phone Monday in their second phone conversation since President Biden took office in January. The European Commission also says it's seeking to send oxygen and medicine to India within the next several days. The bloc also said France and Germany are currently pooling resources to send additional assistance soon. Alarmed at the situation in India, the South Korean government will send aid as well.
We'll immediately hold talks with India regarding the items to be provided, including oxygen generators and test kits.
Seoul's humanitarian assistance to India is reportedly worth millions of US dollars. South Korea's foreign ministry added it's overseeing the return of South Korean nationals in India through various means, including securing flights between the two countries. Kim Hyo-san, Arirang News.
An issue simmering for decades between Korea and Japan is the issue of the Korean women and girls sexually enslaved by the Japanese military during World War II. Japan has long downplayed the issue and claims that, for its part, the issue's been settled. Now the Japanese government says its school textbooks should avoid reference to the fact that the so-called comfort women were victimized specifically by the military. Cheong has this story.
Japan has officially adopted the view that it is more proper to describe the victims of Japan's wartime sexual slavery as comfort women instead of military comfort women, following the country's textbook screening process. According to Japan's NHK News and Yomiuri Shimbun on Tuesday, the government concluded that it is more appropriate to omit the word military when describing the so-called comfort women, as it may lead to misunderstandings. In 2014, Asahi Shimbun retracted articles which addressed the military's use of force against women in Korea after the government judged the testimony to be false. With that ruling in mind, the latest decision comes as a move to avoid further implications that women were forced into sexual slavery by the Japanese military. Currently, Japan's education ministry allows very limited use of the term military comfort women in history textbooks for middle and high school students. This is in accordance with the 1993 Kono Statement, which acknowledged the use of force by the Japanese military in the sexual enslavement of women during the Second World War. However, the latest decision may see changes made to future textbooks if approved by the government. Watchers say this may also spark controversy, as it could be seen as an attempt to distort history and evade responsibility for the forcible recruitment of comfort women. Cheong, Arirang News.
Cardinal Nicholas Cheong, the former Catholic Archbishop of Seoul, died Tuesday at the age of 89. Officials say he'd been hospitalized since February with an unspecified illness. He expressed his intent not to receive life support. He also agreed to donate some of his organs, including his corneas. A mass was held after midnight at Myeongdong Cathedral to mourn his loss. His funeral will be held on Saturday. And that brings us to the end of this newscast. Thank you for watching. More live news coming your way at 7 p.m. Korea time.